Jinnah's second marriage, 1918. 26 years had passed since Muhammad Ali Jinnah's boyhood marriage in the modest house in Karachi. The celebrated advocate and politician of 1918 seemed remote from this episode, from the girl wife in Parda who had died before she could influence his mind or his affections. Jinnah was 41 years old and he had lived for some time alone in a bungalow in Mount Pleasant Road, on the cooler heights above Bombay. From his terrace he could see the ocean, framed between big, rich trees that sheltered him from the brazen light and the noise of the city. In a small office within the bungalow, he wrestled with his problems. In politics and the law, he was able to live simply but comfortably and to dress faultlessly, for he had already made a considerable fortune at the bar. The First World War was not yet over. Battles were still being fought in all the areas of conflict. German troops had penetrated the Caucasus, and the Turks were invading Persia. The weakening defenses of the Russians were opening up a way for the enemy into Afghanistan, the way by which so many conquerors had come to India. Jinnah does not seem to have been aware of these terrible alarms. He devoted his energies and his speeches to his one absorbing plan for Hindu Muslim unity. Despite frequent signs that might have discouraged him, in 1918 there were anti-Muslim riots and acts of terrible cruelty in many parts of India, inspired by the old problem of cow killing by Muslims and Christians, which was so deeply offensive to the religious scruples of the Hindus. While Jinnah was writing hopeful speeches planned to awaken India to the virtues of unity, he had to contend with Gandhi's different view and his declaration that the Hindus would not mind forcing, even at the point of the sword, either the Christians or the Mohammedans to abandon cow slaughter. Jinnah was present at the Calcutta meeting of the All India Muslim League in December 1917 when the British were blamed and condemned for their failure to obtain timely information of the huge organization set on foot by a large section of the Hindu population to plunder the houses of the Muslims, defile and destroy mosques and the Holy Quran. There is a story told in Bombay in varying forms of a day in the Taj Mahal Hotel when an Irish woman who was a clairvoyant asked Mrs. Naidu if Jinnah ever suffered any pain in his arm. It was true that he had sought cures for an ailment which he had kept secret. Mrs. Naidu went over and asked him. He answered, "Why do you wish to know? Who told you?" "Yes, I do have pain in my arm sometimes." Mrs. Naidu went back and told the Irish woman, who said, "Yes, I knew, and I know also that this man will some day create a state of his own." Jinnah could not have plucked much comfort from this prophecy in 1918, as he contemplated Gandhi's growing power over the Hindus and the riots between the races he sought to unite. Also, at this time, he was engrossed in the startling episodes of his courtship and second marriage. Among Muhammad Ali Jinnah's friends was Sir Dinshaw Petit, one of the proud, self-confident Parsis who had helped to make Bombay into a prosperous city. Jinnah liked to escape from his desk and his duties, now and then to dine with the Petits in their elegant house, or to stay at their country place in Pune. Sir Dinshaw Petit had a daughter named Rutanbai, 24 years younger than Jinnah. She was an enchanting girl. Today, a quarter of a century after her death, there are gallant old gentlemen in Bombay who recall her and say, "Ah, Ruti Putit. She was the flower of Bombay. Then, she was so lively, so witty, so full of ideas and jokes." The staid bachelor advocate, sitting on the terrace in Pune, watched Sir Dinshaw Petit's only daughter running in and out of the house. He paused and put his briefs aside. His heart was awakened, the first and only time in his life. Jinnah and Rutanbai Petit were betrothed in secret. When her father was ultimately told, he was furious. He would not tolerate a marriage between his 17-year-old Parsi girl and a Muslim almost twice her age. So he took out an injunction forbidding Jinnah to see her. Jinnah waited and Rutanbai remained devoted. When she was 18, her father had to reconcile himself to the cold announcement in the Statesman on 19 April 1918 that Miss Ratanbai, only daughter of Sir Dinshaw Petit, yesterday underwent conversion to Islam and is today to be married to the Honorable Mr. M.A. Jinnah. The lovely young bride moved into the sombre bachelor house with her books, her ornaments, and her multitude of pretty dresses. She went into her husband's musty rooms in the law courts and enlivened them with bright paint, elegant furniture, and flowers. The first exciting weeks passed in pleasure and harmony. The husband of 41 came home in the evening with his talk of the law courts. The wife of 18 waited, eager for him to see the jade figure she had brought during her idle day and placed on a window sill so that it caught and multiplied the sunlight coming in from the garden. But old cronies called and interrupted them with talk of politics that did not amuse her. She had to listen to their long stories when she wished to be out singing and dancing. At first, Muhammad Ali Jinnah succumbed to his wife's eager charm. He enjoyed her spontaneity and allowed her to influence his behavior as a politician. The governor of Bombay at this time was Lord Wellington, for whom Jinnah began with a good opinion. In October 1916, he had said to the delegates at the Bombay Provincial Conference that Lord Wellington was all kindness and courtesy, and that he knew personally that the governor was in full sympathy with their ideals and aspirations. One alleged episode soon after Jinnah's marriage may have helped to change this view. He was invited with his wife to dine at Government House. The story is that Mrs. Jinnah wore a low-cut dress that did not please her hostess. That while they were seated at the dining table, Lady Wellington asked an ADC to bring a wrap for Mrs. Jinnah in case she felt cold. It is reported that Jinnah rose and said, "When Mrs. Jinnah feels cold, she will say so and ask for a wrap herself." Then he led his wife from the dining room, and from that time he refused to go to Government House again. There was a political background to this alleged incident. 5 days after his marriage, Jinnah had put his name to a manifesto in the Bombay Chronicle, answering an appeal from the Viceroy for increased recruiting and war effort in India. The manifesto repeated the demand that, in return for this war service, Britain should give India the responsible government she had been promised. The signatories described the promise as indefinite and they asked, "Let England pledge herself definitely to redeem the promise by accepting here, as in Ireland, that which our leaders have asked for in the Congress and League Pact, and we will work heart and soul to save Britain, India, and the Empire. We will triumph with her or we will go down with her in world ruin. We cannot forget the ties of many years. But if Britain refuses us our place in the Empire, we shall try as leading a forlorn hope. Whereas, if Britain welcomes us as a nation whose freedom depends upon the issue of the war, the popular enthusiasm will rise to fighting point. Trust us and we will not fail you. But let us fight under the banner of liberty, for nothing less than that will nerve a man to fight and a woman to sacrifice." 6 days later, the Viceroy's war conference sat in Delhi, where Jinnah personally repeated this plea for rewards and benefits in return for India's service. He moved a resolution based on the Bombay Manifesto, but he was ruled out of order. Some 6 weeks later, on 10 June, Lord Wellington presided over a meeting of the Bombay Provincial War Conference. Jinnah attended, and he had to endure a stern reprimand. The governor complained that the activities of a certain number of gentlemen, some of whom have considerable influence with the public, many of them members of the political organization called the Home Rule League, to which Jinnah belonged, had been such of later years that he could not honestly feel sure of the sincerity of their support. Lord Wellington continued, From reading their speeches, the position of these gentlemen seems to be this: we quite realize the gravity of the situation. We are all anxious to help. But unless home rule is promised within a given number of years, we do not think we can stir the imagination of the people, and we cannot hope for a successful issue to the recruiting campaign. To doubt Muhammad Ali Jinnah's sincerity was to question the law of his life. In the argument that followed, Jinnah said to Lord Wellington, "If you wish to enable us to help you to facilitate and stimulate the recruiting, you must make educated people feel that they are citizens of the empire and the king's equal subjects." The meeting ended with recriminations, and Jinnah returned to Mount Pleasant Road with the feeling that he and his colleagues had been insulted. His resentment did not fade during the remaining 6 months of Lord Wellington's term as governor. Mr. Jinnah's young spirit may have helped to keep her husband's anger alive. She was certainly beside him as an ally in the dramatic scenes that preceded Lord Wellington's departure from Bombay. On 11 December 1918, a meeting was called to arrange the customary farewell to a retiring governor. There were many people who shared Jinnah's anger against Lord Wellington, and they began to gather on the steps of the town hall at 10 o'clock on the evening before the meeting. Their protest had been anticipated, and there was already a strong force of police standing nearby. At 10 o'clock next morning, when the hall was to open, Jinnah arrived with his colleagues, and they immediately moved to the head of the queue to take places held during the night by their supporters. Then began a battle for seats, and a scene wholly alien to Jinnah, who had always preached to the young about order and discipline. Outside the hall stood Mrs. Jinnah, a pretty young rebel, marshalling her husband's followers as they pressed forward into the hall. The struggle apparently lasted until 5 o'clock in the evening, when the sheriff arrived and stood up to speak. There was further uproar and cries of shame. A Parsi, Sir James Boy, was elected chairman, but this formality was drowned in cries of "No, no," while the supporters of the platform shrieked and yelled in derision, hurling challenges and epithets at the anti-Wellington faction. It was claimed to afterwards that a resolution of loyalty and appreciation of Lord Wellington had been passed, but it was lost in the clamour. The Commissioner of Police ended the farce by ordering his men to clear the hall. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was among those who were assaulted during the confusion. The cold logician was cold no longer. With his wife beside him, he led a noisy crowd to Apollo Street, where he became a tub thumper for the only time in his life. He stood up above the crowd and said, "Gentlemen, you are the citizens of Bombay. You have today scored a great victory for democracy. Your triumph has made it clear that even the combined forces of bureaucracy and autocracy could not overawe you. December the 11th is a red letter day in the history of Bombay. Gentlemen, go and rejoice over the day that has secured us the triumph of democracy." Mr. Matlub Sayyid has written that after this incident, Jinnah was at once a hero. Public addresses were presented to him, and garden parties were given in his honor. For the first time in his lonely career, Jinnah was a popular figure, a leader of the people. His admirers contributed 30,000 rupees to build a memorial hall in his honor, and in spite of the ravages of partition, it is still called Jinnah Hall. On the wall is a marble plaque recalling the historic triumph of the citizens of Bombay. Under the brave and brilliant leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah,